EX20s, high-speed electric unicycle. King of the cruise, baby. All right, so today I will be filming a comprehensive review of my EX20s high-speed electric unicycle. I've now done 1,500 miles on this bad boy, and while it's mostly all good, it hasn't been all good. Let's talk about it a little bit more. This is the best unicycle ever made. I don't think there's a competition. Easily hands down. Numero uno. Alright, so after 1,500 miles and several modifications later, I think it's pretty safe to say I am extremely satisfied with my EX20s high-speed electric unicycle. I mean, now I've decked it out with all the bells and whistles. I've got an extreme headlight. I put a USB port on it. I've added new tail lights. I mean, this thing is really ripping, raring, and ready to go, which is one of the beautiful things about this electric unicycle, is the fact that it is so customizable. Of course, the EX20s does not come out of the box with a lot of these modifications, so I will be talking and focusing mostly on how this machine was when it came stock out of the box. You can add your own stuff afterwards to change it the way you like. Alright, so let's quickly talk about some of the specifications of the EX20s. First of all, it is a 20-inch tire, which I think is just about the perfect tire size. You get the combination of agility, acceleration. It still takes and eats bumps very well. It's a 2.75, I believe, width, which does a great job of keeping you up. So I really like it. It comes with this knobby tire, which I actually like. I wasn't sure if I was going to be a fan of the knobby. I was kind of thinking I might want to switch this to a street tire right away, but I'm realizing that I'm not really utilizing the top speed of this machine, and it's very nimble as is. So I think I'm going to leave the knobby. I like the extra grip. All right, but of course, everyone wants to know about the battery, right? The battery on the EX20s is actually a 3,600 watt-hour, 100.8 volt battery. So that's an 8P configuration. It's basically like a Sherman, but it's using slightly different cells, so it actually has a little bit more capacity. The batteries themselves are encased in these awesome metal cases, which is a first here in the unicycle world. I really, really like that. It's the first time we've actually seen real protection for our batteries, right? Usually they're just kind of shrink wrapped and stuck in a piece of plastic. So it's nice that these actually have a metal box to hold on to them, to actually give them a little bit more rigidness, a little bit more security. The EX20s is essentially a full metal construction unicycle. I mean, we're talking the frame, sliders, battery boxes. I mean, everything on this thing is metal. The pedals are metal. The light is metal. Even the stock light was metal. I mean, the suspension sliders, everything on this wheel is metal. How long have we been asking for a wheel with a full metal construction? So the stock side pads that the EX20 came with were not my favorite. I do like that they're mechanically attached. You can see the screws here and here that it's actually attached with on a metal plate, and it's adjustable so it slides back and forth. But I wasn't a big fan of how aggressive the front angle was. It kind of hit my shins in a weird place. I'm a tall guy with long legs. So I 3D printed these out of TPU. They're a little bit less aggressive, a little bit further forward. So I like these a lot more, but hey, to each their own. I also 3D printed these little batwing bumpers to protect the corners of the battery case as well. All right, so as far as lighting is concerned on the EX20, the headlight was whatever. It's mediocre. It's nothing crazy. No different than, say, an RS or something. It's definitely not as good as like a V11, but it's whatever. It works. I decided to upgrade mine with a 12-volt modification. You can watch some of my other videos on how I did that. But the one I put on it is like a car headlight. It's amazing. I love it. Highly suggest, if you get an EX20s, to consider putting one of these bad boys on there. taillight is concerned, absolute trash. Worst taillight of any unicycle ever released, honestly. Not only when you're riding is it like blue and green, it's tiny and it's incredibly dull. Even at night you can barely see it. It's ridiculous how dull it is. And it only turns red when you're actually stopping or braking. So the taillight has to be addressed if you're gonna be riding this thing at night. Absolutely abysmal, terrible. Now, if you're the kind of person that loves RGBs on their unicycle, if you follow along with that 12-volt mod, again, it's going to be really, really easy to actually hook those up, wire them in, have your thing glowing whatever colors you want it to glow. You can actually tie it right into either the headlight or the taillight. Those are both 12-volt sockets. The problem is, the headlight socket is only 5 amps, so it's not going to be able to carry a very strong light. So you're talking about lights, it's 12 volts times 5, so you're talking about a 60-watt light is the maximum you can put on the front, and the back is only 3 amps. So you're talking about what, 36 watts is the brightest of a light you can put on the back. So tying into the machine itself, it's possible, it'll work fine for LEDs. But if you want a real light on the front, like a nice headlight, you're probably gonna have to use some kind of a step-down buck converter like I did in order to get your amperage a lot higher than the 5 amps the front is able to facilitate. All right, so some of the other features of the EX20s, it comes with these awesome spike Begode pedals. You guys have heard me in the past talk about how much I'm a big fan of these. I love them. They're large. They're extremely comfortable. They grip your feet absolutely perfectly where I can still move my feet around and I don't feel like I'm totally stuck, but my feet don't slip at all on this bad boy. All right, so let's talk top speed. At 100.8 volts, the free spin on this machine is somewhere around 63 miles per hour. So figure you gotta take about 10 miles an hour off of that to calculate your actual top speed. So you're talking about somewhere in the low 50s is this thing being capable of doing. Please don't ride it at 50 miles an hour, guys. Don't be crazy. As you know, the less battery you have, the bigger you are, the more stress you're putting on the motor, meaning it's windy, hilly, hitting bumps, whatever, the slower you're going to be able to go. So please don't ride this thing much faster than 45 miles an hour. That's kind of like the top that I ever seem to hit on this thing. And it doesn't beep at me at that speed. I believe the beeps start kicking in right around 47, 48 miles an hour. So this is good to cruise somewhere in the low 40s if that's what you need. This can handle it. I tend to cruise somewhere around 35, 36, you know, and I touch the 40s. I don't really cruise in the 40s. The 40s is something you only use when you absolutely need it, right? All right, some other features of the unicycle. It comes with 2 charge ports, which is great. The batteries in this are capable of receiving up to 12 amps maximum. I tend to only charge up to 9 amps. That's what my Alien Rides charger goes up to. It's been absolutely fine doing that. Again, whenever fast charging, please only do it in situations where you absolutely need to. If you're charging at home, if you're not going to use it for another day or two, charge as low as you can. 3 amps, 2 amps, 1 amp if you can. I tend to charge at about 3 amps whenever possible. Speaking of charging at 3 amps, the EX20s comes stock with a 3 amp 100-volt charger. All right, it's got a trolley handle which pops out with this little button here, and it actually feels pretty good. It's nice and sturdy. It gets the job done for sure. It's tall enough for a tall guy like me. I'm 6 feet tall. I would not, absolutely not, try and pick up this machine by the trolley handle. This thing is 102 pounds. It's probably the biggest negative by far on this machine is its weight. It is so heavy, and it really doesn't have a good way to pick it up is the problem. Like, it needs a handlebar in the front. The back is fine, but it needs something in the front to make this easier to carry. On the top here, these 2 buttons, the right side is the power button. The left side is the kill switch button, which you tap twice. It beeps and disengages the motor. So it actually is a complete disengage. You have to tap it twice again in order to re-engage. The kickstand on this bad boy is actually awesome. It works great. So does the mudguard. I would say that stock, this is the best kickstand and mudguard that come on unicycles. The kickstand is ugly, but boy is it functional. I'm a huge fan of the kickstand. All right, as far as the range on this thing is concerned, if you're a big guy riding real aggressively, honestly, you're probably only gonna get about 50 miles out of it. When I say really aggressively, I mean averaging plus 30 plus miles an hour. You know, to average 30 miles an hour means you're doing a lot of 40-mile-an-hour riding. So yeah, if you're riding really aggressive and you're large like me, I'm 6 foot, 200 pounds. If you're even larger than me, you're only gonna get about 50 miles out of it, maybe 60 if you're absolutely lucky, you know, but you're talking about 50 miles for the most aggressive, largest riders. If you're riding it less aggressively, me, I'm 6 foot, about 200 pounds. Try not to get killed by one of these cars here. I tend to get right around 75 to 80 miles out of it riding intermediate pace, you know, averaging 30 miles an hour, 35 tops. You know, maybe I top out at 40, but realistically, a lot of cruising speed. I'm getting 75 to 80 miles on my average trips. But that means if you're a smaller guy and you're riding it really gently, you can easily get 100 miles out of this thing. You know, it just depends on the terrain you're riding, how aggressively you ride, the size of the rider. I mean, it really matters how you accelerate, right? Accelerations are the most taxing on the wheel. Same thing with going up hills. If you watch your unicycle app, whatever you use, I like to use EUC World. If you watch EUC World when you ride, when you accelerate, it eats watt hours. It absolutely eats. It's not the top speed that eats it. It's the accelerations. And the same thing when you're going up a hill. You start going up a hill, you watch those power consumption numbers skyrocket. All right, now let's talk about some of the more subjective things, right? Things that aren't really quantifiable by numbers. How's it feel? Well, I'll tell you, first of all, it feels fast, especially when you really get, when you get on it, when you get comfortable on it, you start riding. I mean, it's pretty stable at speed. I find the further forward I'm sitting on the machine, the more stable it gets. You want to go 35 miles an hour on this, between the speed of the wheel itself and then the suspension, just making it so much more comfortable, so much more safe to ride. You find yourself going 35 miles an hour all day, every single place you go. You just never slow down. In terms of acceleration, it's certainly not as fast as my EXN high speed. The EXN high speed definitely had a little bit more pep off the line. Not that this doesn't have pep. This is still very peppy. It comes off the line way better than a Monster Pro, right? People are honking at me. Fuck them. But you're going to come off the line way better than you would on a Monster Pro, right? That giant 24-inch tire. It's kind of sluggish. This doesn't have the zip that this little 20-inch tire does. So while it's definitely not the fastest accelerating wheel, as you get used to it, as you get used to that weight, it definitely has some good zip to it. Now, in terms of dexterity or agility, right, that's kind of a trickier question to answer because it really depends on how strong you are and how many miles you've had on this machine. It is so heavy, and the pedal height is pretty high on this machine. So it's going to take you a little while to get used to turning this thing. I mean, at first it felt a little clumsy. At this point, I throw it around as if it was the EXN. I really love how nimble this wheel is. It's extremely nimble for its weight and size. I find I'm able to ride this as if it was a small 16-inch wheel, no problem, now that I've put a lot of miles on it. At first, that was not the case. At first, very wide turns, it felt very clunky. You know, doing body turns were really difficult. Right? It was just so heavy to throw around. Now it's a lot easier for me to like literally on a spot throw this bad boy around. I can just, you know, on a dime like any other unicycle. It's really no different. I love how nimble this is. It's comparable to any other 20-inch wheel. Again though, that's going to take some building of strength. It's going to take some getting used to. You're not just going to hop on this thing and instantly be able to control it like you would a smaller wheel. And of course, it's a suspension wheel. We got to talk about the suspension. How does the suspension feel? Amazing, if you ask me. I think it's the best suspension wheel I've ridden, easily. It's definitely better than the V11, better than the Begode Hero. I haven't ridden any. I rode an S18. The S18 was really good, but I would say this is at least as good, if not a little bit better. The suspension on this thing is absolutely wonderful. It's very simple. It's easy to maintain. If you watch some of my other videos, you will see that most of my trouble with this wheel so far has been with the suspension, but it's just been so easy to work on and it feels so good. And it's so simple. That's the thing. I love the design. It's easy to access. There's nothing complicated going on there. When you look at it, even the most technically illiterate person is going to be able to see kind of how it works and how you could address any issues that you do have. So let's talk about the issues that I have had over the course of these 1,500 miles so far. Like I said, they've basically all been with the suspension. Number one, the suspension shock itself. The one that I got from Begode broke within 20 minutes. I mean, literally, it broke almost immediately. I hardly got to ride it at all. It just started leaking air. It was a disaster. So that was a no good. Made my EX20s basically a Sherman for a while there. This thing really is. It's like a Sherman with suspension and all metal construction. It's really nice. It's really great. So I ended up ordering a D&M 36 RC shock off of Amazon.com. I put it on this bad boy and I blew that shock as well. It just couldn't hold enough weight. Unfortunately, because of the weight of this machine and the weight of me combined, you're looking at almost a 1-to-1 ratio of how much pressure needs to be in the shock compared to your weight and the machine's weight. So take your weight and add about 80 pounds, because the only thing that's not suspended on this is the tire and motor. So you can take about 25 pounds off of the weight of the machine. But for the most part, you're talking about your weight plus about 80 pounds. And I'm about 180 pounds or so. So you figure you need about 260 pounds of pressure for this. That's basically what I ride it at. It was about 260 pounds. And the D&M 36 shock was only capable of holding 250 pounds. So I put the 260 in and it blew. I thought there was going to be a little wiggle room. Whatever. So after that, I ended up ordering a D&M 38 RC shock, which does have a little bit more capacity. I think it holds 280 pounds of pressure. So that's what I'm using now. It's been holding up great for me. I put 260 pounds in it. It works perfectly for me and my weight. I absolutely love the way this feels. It's super cush on small bumps and potholes. It doesn't do great on drops. If you're a jumper, I definitely wouldn't jump this wheel no matter what, even if it was good for jumping. 100 and something pounds rolling up on you when you actually fall and mess up. Oh, excuse me. No, thank you. You don't want to be jumping a wheel this heavy. Absolutely not. But even just coming off of curbs and stuff, it's a lot better than a non-suspension wheel. Don't get me wrong. But I think the V11 was a little bit better at soaking up curbs. This is better than the Hero at soaking up curbs. So it's somewhere in between those two. I think it does fine on curbs. It's way better than a non-suspension wheel. But this is really made for the small bumps, for the cracks, for the potholes, for stuff in the road. Like, this thing really just eats the road alive. I love the way this feels when you are zooming at 35 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour on the open road, and you hit a bump or a pothole or something. It's beautiful. All right, in terms of torque on this bad boy, how well does it pull you up hills? How well does it conquer curbs and stuff? For me, I've had no problems at all. I actually love the torque on this thing. It's been fine. I know that many of you have probably seen Wrongway's review of the C38 torque motor of the EX20, and he had a lot of problems with his torque. I was baffled that it performed so poorly, considering that was the torque version. I mean, my high-speed version seems to handle better than that. I mean, I haven't pushed it to any extremes at all, but I mean, I zip right up hills. You should see some of the hills here in Providence. I haven't had any issues at all, climbing curbs, crushing into potholes. And that's actually something I want to talk about next, is the honker of a pothole that I hit that ended up damaging my suspension. That's the other issue that I had. So basically what happened is I was going 35 to 40 miles an hour. I was screwing on my way to work, and I hit a honker of a pothole. I made a short video, you can find it, showing the pothole. It's a beast. I basically ran into a curb at 35, 40 miles an hour. I mean, I slammed this thing. The suspension was great, held me up no problem. I didn't even feel like I did that bad. I thought it was great. I thought I was cruising along, finished, got to work, no problem. Got out of work, went to go ride it, and I realized the suspension was flat. My gut instinct at that point was, God damn it, I popped another shock. I can't believe I keep popping shocks. But I got home and checked, and the shock had plenty of air in it, and that's when I realized I had snapped one of the pins, the linkage pins, on my suspension. So it was actually the top rod up in here. This is the rod that snapped. I actually took this back rod and put it here, and right now I have a temporary solution on this back here. I just bought a bolt from Home Depot that's holding this together right now. I do have a much better fix in the works on its way, as well as some actual manufacturer parts coming eventually to me. But for now, this has been holding up great. It's been absolutely fine to put that there. So at first, when that pin snapped, I thought to myself that this is a design flaw, right? I was like, that pin has got to have some flex. It's got to bend, right? Why would it snap like that? But looking at the location again, I mean, getting into there, if that pin bent, right? If that actually bent and I had to pull that out, it would be absolute disaster. I'd have to rip the whole machine apart. I'd have to cut it. It would be terrible to have to try and get that pin out. So it can't bend, you know, it has to be super strong. But if it's too strong and it doesn't break, I probably would have destroyed my rim. I thought I probably ruined my rim when I cracked into that hole like that. Or who knows what else I might have broken, some other slider piece, something that's a lot more expensive than a little $15, $10 pin. So the more and more I thought about it, the more I realized that whether it was on purpose or not, that may have been designed properly to snap in that situation, so I don't do any damage to the rest of the machine. And it's really easy to swap that pin out. It's part of installing the shock, which on the EX20s is incredibly simple. I can do it in about 10 minutes now that I know what I'm doing. Swapping a shock out on this thing is very simple. So swapping that pin out when I get a replacement will be very simple as well. So all in all, as much of a problem as that is, it's really not that big a problem at all. And I actually think it's a good design on the part of Gotway, whether it was intentional or not. So let's talk about the cooling next. The cooling on this machine is excellent. This might be the coldest running electric unicycle on the market, especially considering the speeds at which it can travel. I mean, I think the hottest I've gotten this thing is like 138 degrees Fahrenheit, which, I mean, on my EXN, and that's on an 80 degree day, like maybe 140 degrees. I can't get this thing to heat up. My EXN would get to 140 degrees on a cold day. So the cooling on this is magnificent, which is probably expected, right? I mean, you're talking about a wheel that's full metal construction. It does have a fan, which kicks on. It's nice and quiet, which is nice. But yeah, the cooling on this machine is excellent. Probably one of the best on the market. Not that I do a ton of hill climbing to really test it and push it to try and get it hot, but just in the course of normal riding, street riding, going fast, 35, 40 miles an hour for long periods, even on my range test, I have not had any issues at all with the heating. This thing is cool as a cucumber. As far as the electronics are concerned, this wheel does have the new Begode control boards, which are actually reprogrammable. I believe they're using the same control board for every wheel now, and you're gonna be able to update that over the air for the first time, which is new to Gotway wheels. They've always been preloaded with their firmware, so it's nice to actually be able to get updates. You can change whatever. It's the same board for every wheel now, so you don't have to get a specific board. It's just you get a Gotway board and you plop the appropriate firmware onto it. So that's nice, knowing that repairs for your control board readily available if you do happen to need one. So like I said earlier in the review, all in all, ecstatic with this wheel. I absolutely love this thing. I don't think there's another wheel on the market I'd rather own. So in conclusion here, the EX20s is really the ultimate city cruising wheel. If you live in a city of some type and you like to ride fast and in the street, there's no wheel I would rather buy than this. Between the suspension, between the performance, the battery. Unless you live on a 3rd floor and you have to carry this thing up 3 flights of stairs, this is the best wheel that you can own in a city, in a commuting scenario. Now, I wouldn't buy this wheel necessarily if you're a big-time off-road rider. It's probably not going to be the wheel for you. If you live at the top of an apartment where you're going to carry this thing upstairs, I definitely would not suggest getting this wheel. But for the type of rider who's basically using this as a car, if you're using your unicycle as your main type of transportation, the EX20s has to be on your radar as a wheel that you should really consider being in your purchase options. For me, the high-speed option is the better, in my opinion, for what I do. I like a wheel that I'm going to be able to peak out at 45 miles an hour when I absolutely need to, without really pushing the limitations of the wheel. The torque version, the C38, I'm sure is going to basically be a lot of the same stuff from my review here. However, it's just not going to have the same top speed, but it might accelerate better. So if you're more into low-end riding and you need a little bit more hill climbing ability, maybe you're planning on doing a little bit more off-roading with this wheel than I do, the torque version might be for you. But for me personally, the speed version really just hits all the perfect notes. Alright, well, as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Be sure to be watching out for my next few episodes. They're going to be on the Begode Hero. It's going to be a great comparison as the other Begode suspension wheel that's currently being released. It's not the Master, but the Hero is still a great little wheel. We're going to check it out. We're going to try it out. We're going to do some reviews, some tests, what have you. But until then, thank you guys so much for watching. And ride safe out there. I'm going to go grab myself a beer because it looks like they're setting up the beer garden right now.